The morning fog lifted slowly over the testing grounds at Kummersdorf on March 12, 1945. Oberst Heinrich Fischer stood beside the captured American tank destroyer, its angular silhouette unlike anything in the German inventory. The 76mm gun pointed skyward from an open turret, the vehicle's low profile and sloped armor betraying its designer's intentions. Someone had stenciled a name on the barrel, Hellcat. Fischer had commanded Panther tanks since Kursk.
If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today.
He had faced Soviet 34s, American Shermans, and British Churchills. But the intelligence reports about this machine, if accurate, suggested something that violated every principle of armored warfare he had learned. A tank destroyer, the reports claimed, that could outrun a Panther by 20 miles per hour. The Continental R-nine-seventy-five engine sat exposed through the open rear deck. Fischer's chief mechanic, Hauptmann Werner Braun, had spent 3 days examining the power plant. A radial aircraft engine, 9 cylinders arranged in a star pattern, producing somewhere between 350 and 400 horsepower. The same type of engine that powered the American M4 Sherman, yet this vehicle weighed only 16.76 tons compared to the Sherman's 30 tons. The power-to-weight ratio was extraordinary, but it was the transmission that had captured Braun's attention. The Americans called it the Torqmatic, a fully automatic transmission with 3 forward gears. No German tank possessed such a system. Every Panther, every Tiger, required the driver to manually shift gears, to double clutch, to coordinate hand and foot movements that became second nature only after hundreds of kilometers of training. This American system promised to eliminate all of that complexity. The question that had brought Fischer to Kummersdorf on this cold March morning was simple. Could this machine really move as fast as the intelligence reports suggested? And if so, what did that mean for German armored doctrine? The Kummersdorf proving grounds, 25 kilometers south of Berlin, had evaluated captured enemy equipment since October 1940. Wehrmacht technical staff had tested French Char B-1 heavy tanks, British Matilda infantry tanks, Soviet 34s and KV-1s. Every new sample of enemy armor arrived in duplicate when possible, one for extensive testing, one for the collection at the Tank Museum in Stettin. The facility possessed 12 kilometers of firing ranges, oval tracks for speed testing, obstacle courses for mobility evaluation. By March 1945, with Soviet forces less than 80 kilometers to the east, Kummersdorf's mission had taken on desperate urgency. The Americans called their armored doctrine for these vehicles seek, strike, and destroy. Tank destroyer battalions were held in reserve, then deployed rapidly to wherever enemy armor concentrated. Speed, not armor protection, provided their defense. The M18 embodied this philosophy absolutely. Its armor ranged from 6mm to 25mm. Any German anti-tank gun could penetrate it. Most infantry weapons could damage it. The open-topped turret left the 5-man crew exposed to grenades, shell fragments, artillery airbursts. German doctrine emphasized armor protection. The Panther carried 80mm of frontal armor, the Tiger 100mm. Even the lighter Panzer IV mounted 80mm on its glacis plate. Armor absorbed punishment. Armor allowed tanks to close with the enemy, to dominate terrain, to hold defensive positions. The American vehicle beside Fischer represented a different calculation entirely. Maximum firepower, maximum speed, minimum protection. Hit first, hit hard, then disappear before return fire arrived. Fischer climbed into the driver's position. The seat sat low in the hull, the forward visibility surprisingly good through the simple hatch. The steering, levers felt lighter than a Panther's. The gear selector was a single lever on the floor. Forward, neutral, reverse. That was all. No complex gear patterns to memorize, no synchronization required. Just select a direction and apply throttle. Braun stood beside the vehicle. The engine is ready, Herr Oberst. Fuel tank is 3/4 full. The Americans left detailed technical manuals in the vehicle when it was captured near Aachen in January. We've studied them thoroughly. Fischer started the engine. The radial aircraft motor caught immediately, settling into a throaty idle quite different from the Maybach engines in German tanks. He engaged forward, pressed the throttle. The M18 lurched forward, accelerating with an eagerness that startled him. The Torqmatic transmission shifted automatically from first to second gear, then to third. The tachometer climbed. 30 kilometers per hour, 40, 50. The vehicle responded to steering inputs with precision, the torsion bar suspension absorbing the rough surface of the test track. 60 kilometers per hour. Fischer had driven Panthers at speed. The Maybach HL230 engine produced 690 horsepower, more than this American motor. But the Panther weighed 45 tons. Getting it to its maximum road speed of 46 kilometers per hour required perfect conditions and sustained acceleration. This American machine had reached 60 kilometers per hour in seconds, and the engine note suggested it had more to give. 70 kilometers per hour. The landscape blurred past. Fischer's hands gripped the steering levers, making constant corrections. At these speeds, any obstacle, any rut in the track surface could throw the vehicle off course. 80 kilometers per hour. He lifted off the throttle, let the speed bleed away, brought the M18 to a stop. His heart hammered. In 30 seconds, he had traveled over half a kilometer. The speedometer had briefly touched 88 kilometers per hour before he decelerated. 55 miles per hour. The intelligence reports were accurate. When Fischer climbed out, his hands were shaking. Not from fear, but from understanding. Braun's face showed the same recognition. Herr Oberst, no Panzer in our inventory can match that speed. Not the Panther, not the Tiger, not even the Panzer IV. The Americans have built something we cannot catch. The reality of armored combat on the Western Front in early 1945 had become a calculus of declining German resources against overwhelming Allied material. Superiority. Every German tank commander knew the statistics. America had produced 49,000 Sherman tanks. Germany's entire production of all tank types from 1939 to 1945 barely exceeded 50,000 vehicles. The Americans, British and Canadians possessed complete air superiority. Allied fighter bombers hunted German armor relentlessly. Supply lines stretched past breaking. Spare parts became scarce. Fuel allocations shrank weekly. Each German tank that broke down often stayed broken down. American logistics, by contrast, operated with industrial efficiency. Tank retrieval units worked under fire to recover damaged vehicles. Repair depots returned Shermans to combat within days. Replacement parts arrived in abundance. And now this. A tank destroyer that could outrun any German armored vehicle, carrying a 76mm high-velocity gun capable of penetrating 88mm of armor at 1,000 meters. Against Panther side armor, against Tiger side armor, against the rear of any German tank, the M18's gun was lethal. The tactical implications were obvious. A German tank commander who spotted an M18 could not pursue it. A Panther's maximum road speed of 46 kilometers per hour meant the Hellcat could escape at will. And if the Hellcat chose to engage, its fully rotating turret gave it 360 degrees of fire. Its crew enjoyed excellent visibility from the open turret top. Most critically, while German tank commanders watched their turrets traverse slowly to meet a flanking threat, the M18 could fire, relocate, and fire again before German guns could track it. Fischer returned to the vehicle. "I want to test the turret traverse." A technician climbed into the gunner's position. The M18's turret rotation was powered by a hydraulic motor, the same basic system as German tanks. But the implementation revealed different priorities. In a Panther, turret traverse speed varied with engine RPM. At low engine speeds, the Panther D took 93 seconds to complete a full 360-degree rotation. Later models improved this, but even the Panther A required 18 seconds for a full rotation at optimal engine speed. The Tiger I took 60 seconds for a full traverse. The Tiger II could manage 19 seconds at 2,000 RPM, but only if the driver maintained that engine speed. The M18's turret completed a full rotation in 15 seconds. More importantly, its lighter turret and responsive hydraulic system meant the gunner could slew rapidly to acquire targets, could track moving threats with ease. The psychological advantage of that capability could not be quantified in numbers alone. A German tank commander who spotted an M18 knew that his turret would take 18 to 60 seconds to traverse if the enemy appeared on his flank. 18 to 60 seconds during which the Hellcat's gun could be firing. That knowledge affected decisions. It made commanders cautious. It discouraged aggressive maneuvers. It created the space for doubt. Fischer spent the afternoon running the M18 through the full range of tests. Acceleration from standstill, emergency stops, reverse speed, which proved surprisingly quick at 26 kilometers per hour, faster than most German tanks could manage going forward. The torsion bar suspension handled rough terrain better than expected, the large road, wheels and wide tracks distributing the vehicle's weight effectively. The low ground pressure meant the M18 could traverse soft soil that would bog down heavier vehicles. At one point, Fischer drove the M18 up a 45-degree incline that would have stalled a Panther. The lightweight and powerful engine pulled the vehicle up slopes that German armor avoided. This meant the Hellcat could use terrain for concealment, could occupy positions that German commanders assumed were tank-proof, could appear from unexpected directions. The crews of the 704th Tank Destroyer Battalion had demonstrated these capabilities at Aracourt on September 19, 1944. 7 M18s, supporting the U.S. 4th Armored Division, encountered over 200 German tanks from multiple Panzer brigades attempting to stop General Patton's advance through Lorraine. The Americans used the terrain, employed the Hellcat's speed to choose engagement ranges, concentrated fire on German tanks that exposed their flanks while maneuvering. By the end of the three-day battle, the 704th Tank Destroyer Battalion had knocked out 39 German tanks while losing only 4 M18s. The kill ratio spoke to training and tactics, but also to a fundamental truth. When one side possessed overwhelming advantages in speed and mobility, it could dictate the terms of engagement. When Fischer's testing concluded, he filed his report with clinical precision. The American M18 gun motor carriage represents a paradigm shift in armored warfare doctrine. Its combination of speed, firepower, and maneuverability creates tactical options unavailable to any Panzer currently in German service. Maximum road speed of 88 km per hour exceeds German tank capabilities by 40 to 60%. Acceleration and agility allow rapid repositioning under fire. The 76mm main gun, while inadequate against frontal armor of late-war German tanks, is devastating against side and rear armor at combat ranges. Most significant is the psychological factor. German tank commanders cannot pursue this vehicle. They cannot prevent its escape. In any flanking engagement, the M18 possesses overwhelming advantage. Our turret traverse speeds, even in the Panther A and Tiger II, are insufficient to track a target moving at the Hellcat's maximum velocity and changing direction rapidly. If forced to engage this vehicle, German tanks must rely on first-shot kills. Any failure to disable the M18 immediately allows it to exploit its speed advantage, maneuver to flank positions, and attack vulnerable armor. The Americans have created a vehicle that turns our doctrinal emphasis on armor protection into a liability. Heavy armor makes German tanks slow. Slow tanks cannot control the engagement envelope against an opponent with this degree of mobility superiority. The report reached Wehrmacht High Command on March 18, 1945. By then, Soviet forces had crossed the Oder River. American armies had captured Cologne and were approaching the Rhine. The strategic situation allowed no response to Fischer's findings. No German design could match the M18's speed without abandoning armor protection entirely. German industry, devastated by Allied bombing, could not retool production lines. Fuel shortages meant that even if faster German tanks existed, they could not be deployed effectively. The Hellcat represented American industrial and tactical innovation that Germany, in March 1945, could not counter. What made Fischer's report particularly stark was its acknowledgement that speed, not armor, would define modern armored warfare. For 2 decades, German doctrine had emphasized protection and firepower. The Panther and Tiger embodied that philosophy, their thick frontal armor allowing them to dominate defensive positions, their powerful guns capable of destroying enemy tanks at extreme ranges. But protection came at a cost. The Panther's 45 tons, the Tiger's 56 tons, made them slow, made them fuel-hungry, made them vulnerable to mechanical breakdown. A Hellcat, encountering a German tank, would not attempt to penetrate its frontal armor. It would use its speed to flank, to attack the sides and rear, where all tanks were vulnerable. And no German tank could prevent that maneuver. Every Panther commander knew the horror of hearing his radio operator report, "Enemy tank destroyer, right flank," and knowing that his turret would take 18 seconds to traverse, knowing that the enemy could fire and relocate before his gun bore on target. The M18's existence validated a different approach to armored warfare. one that prioritized operational tempo over survivability, one that accepted vulnerability in exchange for the ability to control engagement terms. American tank destroyer doctrine, often criticized for its emphasis on defensive operations rather than tank hunting, nevertheless produced in the Hellcat a vehicle that could dominate any engagement it chose to accept and escape any engagement it chose to decline. Fischer's final paragraphs address the question that haunted every German tank commander in early 1945. There is no tactical counter to the M18 within current German capability. Our tanks cannot chase it. Our doctrine provides no framework for combating an enemy who possesses such overwhelming advantages in strategic mobility. If the Hellcat chooses to engage, it will do so from positions of its choosing, at ranges it selects, against armor facings it determines. If it chooses to disengage, no German armored vehicle can pursue. The Americans have demonstrated at Aricourt, at Nancy, and throughout the Bulge offensive that even small numbers of these vehicles, properly employed, can delay or stop German armored formations many times their size. The M18 crew's training and aggressive use of the vehicle's capabilities have proven decisive. Against such opposition, German armor can only rely on ambush tactics, prepared positions, and the hope that American tank destroyers will make tactical errors. This is not a condition from which military victories emerge. The psychological weight of that conclusion extended beyond Kummersdorf's testing grounds. Every German tanker who encountered an M18 carried the knowledge that this enemy could strike and escape before return fire arrived. Tank combat requires confidence, requires belief that one's vehicle provides protection, provides capability to damage the enemy. The Hellcat eroded that confidence. Its speed created doubt. Its agility made every engagement uncertain. A Panther commander who spotted movement on his flank could not know if he faced a Sherman, which his 80mm frontal armor could defeat, or a Hellcat, which would not attack frontally but would circle at speed to reach his vulnerable sides. The pause that uncertainty created, the moment of hesitation while identifying targets, that moment could be fatal. German tactical manuals emphasize the importance of that first moment of contact, the necessity of identifying threats, classifying targets by priority, engaging the most dangerous enemy first. But identifying an M18 told a commander only that he faced an opponent he could not catch. The vehicle's speed transformed identification into a source of stress rather than tactical clarity. By late March 1945, American forces had crossed the Rhine at Remagen. The Ludendorff Bridge, captured intact on March 7th, provided the Americans a bridgehead from which their armor poured into Germany's interior. The M18s of multiple tank destroyer battalions, including the 603rd, 609th, and 656th, supported the breakout operations. Their speed allowed them to exploit gaps in German defenses, to push reconnaissance elements deep into German territory, to appear suddenly in polities, locations where German commanders believed themselves safe from armored attack. The psychological effect of that uncertainty, of knowing that American armor could materialize from unexpected directions at unprecedented speeds, contributed to the collapse of organized German resistance. Fischer never learned whether his report influenced any tactical decisions. The final month of the European War consumed Germany in a chaos of collapsing fronts, severed communications, retreating armies. The Kummersdorf facility was evacuated on April 20th, 1945. The M18 that Fischer had tested, along with other captured vehicles, became part of Panzer Company Kummersdorf, a makeshift unit formed from museum pieces and training vehicles to defend against the Soviet advance. That single M18, according to fragmentary records, engaged Soviet armor near Zossen before being abandoned when its fuel ran out. The broader truth remained. In the calculus of late-war armored combat, speed had become more valuable than protection. The Americans understood this. The M18 represented their commitment to a doctrine that German industry and German tactical thinking could not match. At Kummersdorf, in the final testing of captured enemy equipment before the facility fell to Soviet forces, German engineers and tank commanders confronted a vehicle that embodied everything their doctrine had not prepared them for. A tank destroyer faster than any Panzer, more agile than any German design, carrying adequate firepower to threaten any German armor if it reached flanking positions. And reaching those positions, against an opponent that could not be pursued, that could not be prevented from maneuvering, was something the M18 did with devastating effectiveness. Part 2, corrected version, The statistics from actual combat engagements told the story with brutal clarity. The M18 Hellcat achieved a kill-to-loss ratio of 2.4 to 1 across all theaters of World War II. In Europe specifically, where it faced the heaviest German armor, the ratio stood at 2.3 to 1. 526 enemy tanks destroyed, 498 of those in Europe, 17 in Italy, 11 in the Pacific. Against an enemy whose tanks were generally superior in armor protection and often superior in main gun penetration.
If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this.
The Hellcat's crews had destroyed more than twice as many enemy vehicles as they lost. The numbers reflected not merely the vehicle's capabilities, but the doctrine that guided its employment and the training that allowed crews to exploit its advantages. The Battle of the Bulge provided the most comprehensive demonstration of what the M18 could accomplish when doctrine, training, and vehicle capability aligned. December 19, 1944, near the village of Neuville, 4 kilometers northeast of Bastogne, the German 2nd Panzer Division, part of the 5th Panzer Army's thrust toward the Meuse River, advanced through heavy fog toward the American defensive positions. Their mission required seizing the road network around Bastogne to maintain the offensive's momentum and, critically, to capture the fuel dumps the German armor desperately needed. Without those fuel supplies, the entire Ardennes offensive would stall. Team de Sobry, a battalion-sized task force from the 10th Armored Division, defended Neuville with infantry from the 506th Parachute Infantry Regiment, 1st Battalion, 101st Airborne Division. Supporting them were 4 M18 tank destroyers from the 705th Tank Destroyer Battalion, 4 vehicles against elements of an entire Panzer division. The fog that morning reduced visibility to 30 meters. Lieutenant Edwin Leiper, commanding one of the M18s, saw the muzzle of a German tank gun emerge from the mist at a distance of less than 10 meters. The German crew had not yet spotted the American position. Leiper's gunner fired immediately. The 76mm armor-piercing round penetrated the Panzer IV's side armor, detonating the ammunition. The explosion lit the fog like a signal flare, revealing the shapes of more German tanks advancing through the mist. What followed was close-range violence, the kind of engagement where visibility mattered more than armor protection, where the first shot determined survival. 3 of the 4 M18s were knocked out in the initial contact. The crews who survived evacuated their vehicles and joined the infantry. But that brutal opening exchange had alerted the American defenders to the German attack's direction and strength. Company C of the 704th Tank Destroyer Battalion, positioned in support of other defensive sectors around Neuville, redeployed their M18s to meet the continuing German advance. As the fog lifted through the morning, it revealed to the 3 American companies a force of 30 German tanks with supporting infantry. The tactical situation appeared hopeless. 30 German tanks against 3 company-sized defensive positions with limited armor support. But the Hellcat's design philosophy, its entire reason for existence, was for exactly this scenario. The German tanks advanced in formation, using their numbers and firepower to suppress American positions. Standard Panzer doctrine emphasized coordinated movement, mutual support, overwhelming firepower, but that doctrine assumed the enemy would either stand and fight or retreat. It did not account for an opponent who could maneuver faster than the German tanks could traverse their turrets. The M18 crews exploited the terrain, using Neuville's buildings and the surrounding hedgerows for concealment. When a Panther began its ponderous advance toward one company's position, it exposed its flank to the M18s supporting the adjacent company. The German commander would recognize the threat, would order his driver to halt, would traverse his turret to engage the new threat. The Panther's turret, traverse at optimal engine speed, required 18 seconds for a full rotation. If the Panther needed to turn 90 degrees to address a flank threat, that meant 4.5 seconds minimum, assuming the driver maintained high engine RPMs and the hydraulic system functioned perfectly. In combat, under stress, with the vehicle maneuvering over rough terrain, actual traverse times ran longer. During those seconds, the M18 crews fired, reloaded, and if necessary relocated. The Hellcat suspension allowed firing on the move with acceptable accuracy at ranges under 500 meters. The psychological effect on German tank commanders was profound. Every time they committed to advancing toward one American position, They exposed themselves to fire from positions they could not engage quickly enough to suppress. By the end of the engagement at Noville, the accounting was stark. Team de Sobry and the supporting M18 crews were credited with destroying at least 30 German tanks and inflicting between 500 and 1,000 casualties on the 2nd Panzer Division. A military historian analyzing the battle for a documentary decades later credited the M18 specifically with 24 of those tank kills, including several Tiger tanks. The Hellcat's ability to shoot and scoot, to appear at one firing position, engage, then reappear elsewhere on the battlefield, had confused and slowed the German attack until it stalled completely. The Americans retained control of Noville overnight, buying crucial time for the 101st Airborne to consolidate Bastion's defenses. This was not an anomaly. Similar engagements occurred throughout the Ardennes offensive. The M18s of the 638th Tank Destroyer Battalion supported operations near St. Vith. The 805th Tank Destroyer Battalion operated in defense of key crossroads throughout the salient. In each case, the pattern repeated. German armor, attempting to maintain offensive and momentum, encountered American tank destroyer units that refused to fight on German terms. The Hellcats engaged from unexpected positions, inflicted casualties, then relocated before German return fire could be effective. The tactical principle was simple but devastating. In armored warfare, the side that controls the engagement envelope, that determines where and when combat occurs, possesses overwhelming advantage. The M18's speed meant its crews could choose every engagement. If the tactical situation favored combat, they fought. If conditions were unfavorable, they withdrew at speeds German tanks could not match. This capability transformed defensive operations from static positions that German armor could suppress with concentrated fire into fluid battles, where American tank destroyers appeared and vanished like ghosts. German tank commanders, accustomed to breakthrough operations where speed and shock created the conditions for victory, now faced opponents who were faster, who could not be pinned, who struck and faded before countermeasures could be organized. The frustration this created went beyond tactical disadvantage. It struck at the psychological foundations of Panzer doctrine. The Panzerwaffe had built its identity on aggressive maneuver, on the breakthrough and exploitation, on the principle that armor properly employed was an offensive weapon that could unhinge enemy defenses and create operational chaos. From Poland in 1939 through France in 1940, across the steppes of Russia in 1941, German armor had demonstrated that speed and violence could shatter enemy formations. But that doctrine required that German tanks be faster than their opponents, or at minimum, that they possessed sufficient protection to close with the enemy despite taking fire. The Panther and Tiger represented the Wehrmacht's response to the 34 and KV-1, tanks whose combination of firepower, protection, and mobility had shocked German forces in 1941. The Panther was designed to match the 34's sloped armor and 76mm gun, while providing superior optics and crew ergonomics. The Tiger was designed to dominate any tank engagement through overwhelming firepower and protection. Both designs succeeded at their intended purposes. A Panther could defeat a 34 in most engagements. A Tiger could destroy virtually any Allied tank at ranges where Allied guns could not penetrate Tiger armor. But both designs sacrificed speed for protection. Both designs assumed that German tanks would either attack or defend from prepared positions. Neither design contemplated an enemy who could maneuver faster than German tanks could respond. The M18 exploited that assumption ruthlessly. Its crews understood that their vehicle's thin armor meant death if struck by any German tank gun. They also understood that their speed meant German tanks would have difficulty landing that fatal shot. The tactics that emerged from this understanding prioritized movement above all else. An M18 that remained stationary was an M18 inviting destruction. An M18 in motion, constantly relocating, firing from unexpected positions, created targeting problems German gunners struggled to solve. The mental calculation for a German tank commander became paralyzing. If he spotted an M18, should he engage immediately, knowing his first shot might be his only shot, or should he maneuver to close the range, knowing the Hellcat could withdraw faster than he could advance? If he did engage, should he fire armor-piercing ammunition, appropriate for tank targets but less effective if the shot missed, or high explosive, which had better effect against the M18's light armor but less penetration? These questions had to be answered in seconds. while the M18 crew was already maneuvering, already bringing their gun to bear. Training amplified the M18's mechanical advantages. American tank, destroyer crews attended specialized schools where doctrine emphasized aggressive tactics, rapid decision-making, and exploitation of the vehicle's mobility. Gunnery training stressed first-round hits because tank destroyer doctrine assumed crews would not survive to fire a second shot if the first missed. Driver training emphasized high-speed maneuvering over varied terrain. The combination produced crews who understood their vehicle's capabilities and limitations intimately. They knew the M18 could not survive direct hits. They knew their armor would not protect them, but they also knew that if they moved fast enough, shot accurately enough, and chose their engagements properly, they would survive and their targets would not. This understanding created aggressive, confident crews who pressed their advantages without hesitation. The contrast with late-war German tank crews was stark. By 1944, veteran German tankers were increasingly rare. Losses on the eastern and western fronts meant replacement crews arrived with minimal training, sometimes as little as 4 weeks from induction to frontline service. These crews lacked the experience to exploit their vehicle's advantages fully. A Panther in the hands of an inexperienced crew lost much of its effectiveness. The tank's complexity, its temperamental transmission and final drives, required skilled maintenance that replacement crews often could not provide. When breakdowns occurred, and they occurred frequently, the crews lacked the knowledge to execute field repairs. The vehicles were abandoned, not because they were destroyed in combat, but because they were mechanically unreliable and their crews could not fix them. The M18, by contrast, was mechanically robust. Its Continental radial engine was the same design that powered tens of thousands of Sherman tanks. Spare parts existed in abundance. The Torqmatic transmission, while novel for its time, proved reliable in service. When M18s broke down, recovery vehicles towed them to repair facilities that returned them to service rapidly. The logistical infrastructure supporting American armor meant that crew training could focus on combat tactics rather than emergency maintenance. German intelligence reports from late 1944 and early 1945 reflected growing awareness of the M18's impact. Interrogation records of American prisoners occasionally mentioned the Hellcat, providing fragmentary details about its capabilities. German troops who survived engagements with M18s reported its speed and agility, but translating that awareness into effective countermeasures proved impossible. The tactical solutions required either faster German tanks, which did not exist, or overwhelming force concentration, which Germany's deteriorating strategic position made increasingly difficult to achieve. The operational solution required air superiority to hunt American tank destroyers before they reached the battlefield, but the Luftwaffe by 1945 had effectively ceased to exist as a fighting force. The strategic solution required industrial capacity to produce tanks in numbers that could absorb losses and maintain offensive operations. But Allied bombing had reduced German tank production to a fraction of its peak capacity. At Hillersleben, another Wehrmacht testing facility, German engineers examined different aspects of captured American equipment. While Kummersdorf focused on operational testing, Hillersleben concentrated on armor penetration trials and automotive engineering analysis. When captured M18 components reached Hillersleben in early 1945, the engineering staff dismantled the Torqmatic transmission to understand its design. The German report praised the transmission's simplicity and reliability, but noted that German industry lacked the precision manufacturing capabilities and materials to replicate it. The torsion bar suspension received similar assessment. The design was straightforward. The execution demonstrated American manufacturing quality that Germany could no longer match. The 76mm M1A1 gun interested German ordnance specialists because it represented American attempts to develop high-velocity anti-tank guns. The M1A1 could penetrate 88mm of armor at 1,000 meters with standard armor-piercing ammunition. With the specialized HVAP high-velocity armor-piercing rounds that began appearing in limited quantities in late 1944, penetration increased dramatically, allowing the M18 to threaten even Panther frontal armor at medium ranges. But HVAP ammunition remained scarce throughout the war, and most M18 crews relied on standard rounds supplemented by high-explosive shells for engaging soft targets. The open-topped turret generated significant discussion in German assessments. From a protection standpoint, the design was obviously inferior. Crews were exposed to air-burst artillery, to grenades, to small arms fire. In urban combat, as American forces pushed into German cities during early 1945, this vulnerability proved severe. M18s operating in close terrain suffered casualties from German infantry, who could engage the exposed crews with rifles and machine guns. But German analysts also acknowledged the visibility advantages. The M18 commander could observe the battlefield without the periscope restrictions that limited vision in fully enclosed turrets. In fluid combat, that visibility translated to earlier threat detection and faster tactical decision-making. The trade-off between protection and awareness represented different doctrinal priorities. German doctrine emphasized crew survival through armor protection. American tank destroyer doctrine accepted vulnerability in exchange for awareness and speed. The final major engagement involving M18s in significant numbers occurred during the Ruhr Pocket battles in April 1945. German Army Group B, surrounded by American forces, attempted multiple breakout operations. American tank destroyer battalions, including those equipped with M18s, formed key elements of the encircling forces. The breakout attempts followed predictable patterns. German armor would concentrate at a chosen point, attempt to achieve local superiority through massed assault, punch through American lines, and create an escape corridor for the trapped divisions. The American response relied on the rapid deployment of mobile reserves, particularly tank destroyer battalions, to reinforce threatened sectors. The M18 speed meant it could reach crisis points faster than any other American armored vehicle. Units that received breakout warnings could relocate entire platoons of Hellcats to blocking positions before German attacks developed fully. When German armor did break through initial defensive lines, M18s operating in the American rear areas engaged them from flanking positions, using the same hit-and-run tactics that had proven effective throughout the campaign. The psychological toll on German forces by April 1945 defies easy quantification, but prisoner interrogations and captured documents provide fragmentary evidence. Tank crews describe the stress of operating vehicles that were mechanically unreliable, chronically short of fuel, supported by crumbling logistics, and facing enemies who possessed every material advantage. The knowledge that American tank destroyers could appear without warning, engage from unexpected directions, and escape before German guns could respond effectively contributed to a pervasive sense of hopelessness. German commanders could not plan operations that assumed their armor would survive contact with the enemy. They could not guarantee that committed forces would achieve objectives before running out of fuel. They could not protect supply columns from air attack. They could not repair damaged vehicles because spare parts did not exist. Under these conditions, the M18 became symbolic of American material superiority, a vehicle that embodied everything German industry could no longer produce and German logistics could no longer sustain. When the war ended in May 1945, the M18 Hellcat service record validated American tank destroyer doctrine in ways that surprised even its advocates. Tank destroyers were supposed to be defensive weapons, held in reserve, committed only when enemy armor threatened breakthrough. In practice, M18s operated far more aggressively, serving as reconnaissance vehicles, providing direct fire support for infantry, engaging fortifications, and hunting tanks when opportunities arose. The vehicle's versatility emerged from its speed and mobility. A tank destroyer that could reposition rapidly could fill multiple roles. The crews who operated Hellcats understood this instinctively. They pushed the vehicle beyond its designed mission parameters, proving that speed created tactical flexibility that doctrine had not fully anticipated. The post-war fate of the M18 reflected the vehicle's strengths and the changing nature of armored warfare. The U.S. Army retired the Hellcat immediately after World War II ended, declaring it obsolete. The combination of thin armor and the 76mm gun, adequate for 1944, could not address post-war threats. But other nations saw value in the design. Yugoslavia received approximately 240 M18s under the Mutual Defense Assistance Program during the 1950s. These vehicles served in Yugoslav armored units through the 1980s and saw combat during the Yugoslav wars of the 1990s. The fact that a World War II-era tank destroyer remained militarily useful 50 years after its design spoke to the fundamental correctness of prioritizing speed and mobility. In conflicts where sophisticated anti-tank guided missiles made armor protection increasingly irrelevant, the M18's speed and low silhouette provided genuine advantages. Yugoslav crews in the 1990s added improvised rubber armor to protect against heat warheads, but the vehicle's basic design required no modification to remain combat effective. The lessons German tank commanders learned from encountering the M18 influenced post-war German armored vehicle development. The Bundeswehr, when it formed in the 1950s, emphasized speed and mobility in its tank designs. The Leopard 1 main battle tank, introduced in 1965, prioritized firepower and speed over armor protection, reflecting the understanding that modern anti-tank weapons could defeat heavy armor regardless of thickness. Better to avoid being hit, the thinking went, than to rely on protection that might be inadequate anyway. This represented a fundamental shift from the Panther and Tiger philosophy that dominated German design during World War II. The shift was informed by combat experience, by the recognition that the side which controlled engagement terms through superior mobility possessed decisive advantages. American tank destroyer doctrine ended with World War II. The separate tank destroyer branch was dissolved. Future American tanks would mount guns adequate for anti-tank combat, eliminating the need for specialized vehicles. But the M18 influenced post-war American armored vehicle design in subtler ways. The emphasis on automotive performance, on reliable transmissions and powerful engines, on sacrificing some armor protection to achieve superior mobility. These principles appeared in vehicles like the M41 Walker Bulldog light tank and eventually the M551 Sheridan. The understanding that speed was itself a form of protection, that mobility created tactical options, that controlling the engagement envelope mattered more than surviving enemy fire, these insights persisted in American armored doctrine. The men who tested the M18 at Kummersdorf in the Seine, March 1945, understood all of this in potential, if not in detail. They understood that they were examining a vehicle that represented a different philosophy of armored warfare. They understood that German industry and German tactical thinking had not produced an equivalent. They understood that no Panzer in the Wehrmacht inventory could match the Hellcat's speed. That German doctrine provided no framework for combating such overwhelming mobility advantages, that the tactical solutions required capabilities Germany no longer possessed. These insights, documented in technical reports and test results, joined the vast archive of German military intelligence that disappeared into the chaos of defeat. The knowledge existed, but the capacity to act on that knowledge did not. On April 20th, 1945, the Soviet Third Shock Army's reconnaissance elements reached the outskirts of Kummersdorf. The facility staff had been evacuating for days, destroying documents, sabotaging equipment, removing anything of intelligence value. The captured American vehicles, including the M18 that Oberst Fischer had tested, were formed into Panzer Company Kummersdorf, a unit that existed primarily on paper but reflected the desperation of Germany's final days. That hastily formed unit engaged Soviet armor near Zossen on April 22nd. The battle was brief, chaotic, its details lost in the collapse of German command and control. The M18, according to Soviet records, was found abandoned 2 days later, out of fuel. Its crew vanished into the mass of retreating German forces. Soviet technical teams examined the vehicle, documented its specifications, and eventually shipped it to Moscow for further study. Soviet tank designers, developing the vehicles that would become the T-54 and T-55 series, incorporated lessons about mobility and automotive performance that American designs had demonstrated. The influence was indirect, filtered through analysis of multiple captured vehicles, but it existed. The post-war Soviet emphasis on speed and operational maneuver, evident in their armored doctrine through the Cold War, reflected understanding that mobility shaped modern combat outcomes. Whether that understanding came partially from examining captured M18s is impossible to prove definitively, but the timeline and the vehicle's presence in Soviet testing facilities suggest the connection existed. The broader truth transcended individual vehicles and specific engagements. The M18 Hellcat demonstrated that doctrinal innovation and industrial capacity, properly combined, could overcome apparent disadvantages. Its thin armor, viewed in isolation, was a critical weakness. Its 76mm gun, compared to German 88mm weapons, appeared inadequate, but integrated into a system that emphasized speed, training, aggressive tactics, and overwhelming logistics. These apparent weaknesses became acceptable trade-offs for capabilities that transformed battlefield dynamics. The German military tradition emphasized superior equipment, tactical excellence, and operational art. When German tanks were better, when German tactics were superior, when German commanders outmaneuvered their opponents, the Wehrmacht won. But by 1944, Allied material superiority and doctrinal adaptation had eliminated those German advantages. The M18 represented one element of that larger shift, a vehicle that German equipment could not match and German industry could not replicate, operated by crews whose training and support exceeded what Germany could provide. The story of German tankers testing the M18 at Kummersdorf in the final weeks of World War II is ultimately a story about the limits of tactical excellence when confronting systemic disadvantages. The German officers and technicians who evaluated the vehicle understood its capabilities. They recognized its significance. They documented its implications for armored combat. But understanding did not create solutions. The knowledge that no German tank could catch a Hellcat, that German doctrine could not counter its mobility advantages, that German industry could not produce equivalent vehicles, this knowledge existed in technical reports filed with Wehrmacht High Command during a period when Wehrmacht High Command was fighting for survival. The reports documented reality, but reality by then allowed no favorable options. In the final accounting, the M18 Hellcat's significance extended beyond its combat record, beyond its technical specifications, beyond its doctrinal innovations. It represented American industry's capacity to design, produce, and field sophisticated weapon systems at scale. It represented training programs that created competent crews faster than those crews were lost to combat. It represented logistics that kept vehicles running despite intensive operations. It represented doctrinal flexibility that allowed equipment to be employed beyond its original design parameters. These systemic advantages, more than any individual weapons capabilities, determined World War II's outcome. The German tank crews who encountered Hellcats in combat, who could not pursue them, who could not prevent their escape, who died when 76mm rounds penetrated their tank's side armor, these men learned through experience what the testers at Kummersdorf documented through analysis. Speed had become more valuable than armor. Mobility had become more important than protection. The side that controlled when and where combat occurred possessed overwhelming advantages, and no Panzer, no matter how well designed, no matter how expertly crewed, could chase something that fast.
Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now and don't forget to subscribe.